Yes.
Great. Okay, good. So good morning. So most of you know me. I mean, I'm Kelly McGuinness. I'm a Senior Vice President of the Northeast Regional Manager for PrimeLending. What are we going to say? I'm co-founder of the RAMP program here with Alan, which was a program that he and I were pretty passionate and worked hard to develop before the pandemic, in an effort to help provide real world solutions and real world training to new agents coming into the business. And, you know, the stats are pretty grim about how many agents will make it through the first couple of years in business. And our goal really was, let's give people as much ammunition and training and support. And again, we keep saying real world experience, that it's hard to get that kind of going through a lot of traditional training programs, right? So again, so happy to be here. And this is a new presentation. I literally have been writing it for about a week. I called Rachel yesterday. I said, Rach, what time is lunch coming? Because I really don't think I have that much to talk about. Then I really started working on it yesterday. I emailed Rach back. I go, I hope I have enough time. I just hope I have enough time. So hopefully we're gonna have a robust conversation and provocative discussion over current market conditions and some strategies, both lending and otherwise, to help you attend to the unique opportunities and challenges that the market currently has. So let's see, where's my clicker? All right, so let's talk about current market conditions. What's going on in the market right now that's creating you know, the business that we work in every day? We have higher interest rates in 2022. I gotta get my year straight. Interest rates went up faster than any other time in history. We're going to talk about why that was, what's going to happen with interest rates, how you can better manage your clients' expectations around interest rates. Housing bubble, big question mark, right? I can't tell you how many times I talk with a buyer. We were just having this conversation and they say to us, oh, I'm going to wait for the bubble to burst and then I'm going to go buy my house when property values come down. I had one person say to me, when property values come down 50%. So how do we manage those conversations and the psychology of buyers and sellers around those unique issues? Lack of inventory, like, you know, conversation that we just had, 3,125 listings on Smart MLS this morning, compared to an average of between 12 and 15,000. You know, and the Northeast in particular, and Connecticut, especially within the Northeast, we're still in it. There are many parts of the country that have come out of this inventory crisis, but we're still in it. And our spring market is going to be dominated, I think, by this. And so the question is, how are we handling it? How are we going forward with it, et cetera? Multiple offers, cash offers, they hurt us in the mortgage business, right? All of a sudden, I think the latest statistic was 40% of the deals in the last 6 months were cash. So now we have a tight market, and as a mortgage lender, I'm cut out of 60%. I'm cut out 40% of what's even available. So, you know, how are we going to handle that? And how do we position buyers and borrowers who need financing to compete against these cash offers? Is there a way to position them? I would argue yes, but you've got to really be very deliberate in how you're doing it. And we're here to help with that. And again, we'll talk about these strategies. Appraised values. So we know properties are still going over list price, right? Here in Connecticut, there are pockets where we haven't seen that. It's interesting. I've had a number of transactions in the last 4 months where people purchased at like 90% of list price. And we know all the reasons why that would be the case. Sellers may still have an unrealistic expectation of what their houses should be listed at. You know, we're seeing some price reductions now in the marketplace. What's the psychology and mentality of why that's happening? And how do we handle it? What happens when a property doesn't appraise out, right? And how are we going to approach it? And again, we've got solutions for that. And then the conversation that we just started having, right, is misinformation, right? It's what is the media saying about what's going on in the market. So we know, I mean, fear sells. Fear sells. And you're going to get some access to slides when I email these out to you after the session that hopefully you'll be able to recreate and share with your buyers that will kind of calm some of these fears down. God bless you. So now the latest statistic that everybody's asking me about, realtors, buyers, well, you know, foreclosures are up 150%. Yes. It's easy to be up 150% in foreclosures when there was a 2-year moratorium on foreclosures. And you say that to people. I mean, I would tell you the strategies and tips and tricks and information I'm giving you today, I use in my business every day. Alan uses in his business every day. You say that to somebody and you get this response like, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. Yeah, 150% of zero. Oh, I wasn't thinking it like that way. No, because you know, as Americans, we're not doing our research, we're not doing the due diligence on the information we're being flooded with. But if you have a couple of data points that you can educate and speak to, it's amazing how you can then control the entire narrative with your buyers and sellers. And that to me is the greatest way to sell is know your stuff, know what you're talking about, educate your market. And right, that's what I do every day. That's what we all do every day, but to the extent that you can do it. Now, I'm a strategist, but I pride myself on being a strategist. And what I mean by that is I go out and get all sorts of data points, all sorts of information. I am an avid researcher. I do make sure that facts I'm going to quote are accurate, or if they're not, or I try to provide context to it, right? So what I do in these presentations is kind of cull all that together to give it to you in a kind of a succinct way so that you can deliver that information to your buyers and sellers. Okay, so we use statistics to educate. So let's start with the first topic, higher interest rates. Why were interest rates so low during the pandemic? There's 2 reasons. Number one, we know the Fed dropped interest rates, right? So global pandemic happens. The fear is that the economy is going to come to a grinding halt. And so what does the Fed do? It drops interest rates for borrowing power so that money starts flowing into the markets. That's one thing. That had a little bit of an impact on mortgage rates. That wasn't why mortgage rates dropped. And this is the big misunderstanding about what the Fed is doing with mortgage rates, okay? The main reason mortgage rates dropped is because the Fed came back with something called quantitative easing. And the only other time in history that the Fed has done this was during the housing crisis and the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008, 2009. Because what the Fed did is if you understand the mortgage industry, there is a separate market. You have stocks and bonds, right? Those are markets, commodity markets. Well, there's an entirely separate market called the mortgage-backed security market. Mortgages are packaged and sold into the market as mortgage-backed securities. Well, what happens is when the pandemic hit, the Fed was worried the mortgage-backed security market was going to collapse. Nobody was going to buy the product. So what did the Fed do? It started buying the product. So the Fed came in and every month was buying mortgage-backed securities at record paces. That's what drove interest rates down and kept them down. The important thing to understand, especially talking to buyers today, good morning.
Good morning, sorry.
No, you're fine, is those were artificially low interest rates. That's not where market interest rates were or should have been. It was all a result of the pandemic, okay? Why did they go up so fast? Well, we all knew that mortgage rates were going to go up fast, but what the Fed did in November, which took everyone by surprise, is they made an announcement they were going to stop buying mortgage-backed securities. So market responds, rates pop up. I can't remember, like I probably blocked it because of the trauma of that day, what happened in the market that day, but rates popped up and they didn't necessarily give a guideline. So what happens when that happens? The market starts speculating. Okay, they're going to stop buying mortgage-backed securities in March. They're going to stop buying. Next month, the next month, they announced they're going to stop fast soon. Rates went up again. Now what happens? Now they're also deciding to raise interest rates through the Fed fund rate. And all of that combined is what took mortgage rates from 3%, and in some cases to 7.25% over a very short period of time. Okay, very short period of time. Where are rates headed? I've got several slides I'm going to show you that on. We're going to talk about buy downs and debt restructure as a lending strategy. And we're going to talk about combining seller concessions in lieu of price reductions for those deals that might hit that. So this is the first chart. When you're talking to clients, every time the Fed meets, my phone starts ringing with clients saying, rates went up again, Kelly. Whenever those rates are announced, typically mortgage rates go down that day. Because what's happening is leading up to the Fed meetings, the market is posturing on what the Fed's, not only what they're going to do with interest rates, how high they're going to raise them, but also how hawkish are their comments afterward. So all of that is already built in. The Fed has told us where they're going to take the Fed funds rate to. Do you think any market is going to wait until that happens before building it in? No. What you need to understand so importantly, and what you need to describe to your clients or explain to your clients is mortgage rates follow inflation. So this is a graph that shows exactly what the 30-year fixed rate mortgages, that's the blue line that starts on the top here and dips down, compared to CPI, core price index inflation. And if you look at this carefully, you can see that mortgage rates always follow inflation. So what's happened here is, we have a global pandemic. We also have global inflation. It's not just the United States that's fighting inflation right now. It's Europe, it's China. I mean, every global nation is dealing with an inflation problem because of the global nature of economies and the impact that the pandemic had. So the only period of time, okay, that you saw rates kind of still stable despite the fact inflation was going up was when we had QE, that qualitative easing. So that the fact that inflation was starting to rise, we lagged it a little bit more in interest rates because the Fed was still buying all those mortgage-backed securities. But look what happens, okay, in the fall, between July and January, when the Fed says they're going to stop, boom, our mortgage rate shot up, right? So here's what I say. Here's an easy thing to say to a client. Mortgage rates follow inflation. You have to be living under a rock not to know what's the single greatest priority of the Fed right now. To lower inflation. Everything they're doing, raising interest rates, stops the economy from being overheated, right? What markets were so overheated during the pandemic? What were the two most, well, there's a couple, but what markets do you know were so overheated during the pandemic?
Real assets and bigger assets.
Real estate,
Yeah.
like we have prices going up, right? And then secondarily, good morning, the labor market. Like, has anybody been to a restaurant lately that couldn't open one night because they couldn't get help? That's still happening. Contractors. I mean, we've got one of the hottest labor markets in the history of America.
I couldn't get people to mow all my property's lawns.
Correct. Correct. So when you've got that kind of positive, it depends on how you look at it, right? You've got that kind of demand in the marketplace, inflation's going to go up. Right? I'm not going to come to work for restaurant A for $15 an hour because restaurant B is going to pay me $18. Now we've got wage inflation. So all of this overheated the US economy. Well, we know that the reason why the Fed is lowering interest rates, raising interest rates is to slow the economy down. And they're going to do it. It's starting already. So understanding that mortgage rates follow inflation, what does that mean for mortgage rates in the future? They're coming down. They're coming down, okay? This graph, I love this graph. This graph shows you where CPI was each month. Now, the way we measure this is you add up a 12-month average, 0.3, 0.2. Let's start on this side, 0.3, 0.2, 0.3, add all this up, and you divide it by 12, and that gives you your CPI index, right? Well, when the reason inflation was peaking is because when you look at periods of time like August of 2021, core inflation was 0.2%. As inflation has gone up and these numbers have trended up, basically what we know is we can somewhat time when rates are going to come down, because we have higher numbers replacing lower numbers, which means that inflation will then be tamed the way this is evaluated. So what we can tell you is we've got this May 10th date scheduled here, highlighted. Oh, the CPI was announced yesterday. Everybody was on bated breath. You know, if you're in my business at 8:30, waiting for the CPI numbers to come out. They were essentially flat, which was disappointing because the Fed was hoping they'd see them come down. But what happened to mortgage rates yesterday? First thing in the morning, they popped up about 0.1%. By the afternoon, they were back down 0.1%. So, you know, not a big impact based on the fact of what's happening. But what we now know is if you look at April, May, and June of 2022, see those big numbers, 0.6, 0.6, 0.7? Once we come into April, May, and June of this year, those CPI readings are going to be dramatically better. Rates will come down.
So just so I understand the graph correctly, it seems that in December of 2022, inflation was at 3%, correct? Right?
Yep.
Okay.
0.3%.
Okay. 0.3%, not 3%.
0.3. And the reason that you see a 5.7 number, like I said, it's you add all this up.
Yeah.
Okay, you add it all up, and that's where you get your number from. What's more important is just watching the trend and fall of it, so that we can predict based on the fact that April, May, and June of 2022, that 0.6, 0.6, 0.7 numbers, those were high compared to the previous April, May, and June, which were really, really low. So it's all about the direction that it's trending, and we'll have a flattening, we believe, in May on that May 10th announcement, where we'll start to see rates coming down. I don't know that I would advertise that a lot, because the last thing I want to do is put buyers on the sideline even more, but that's exactly what's going to be happening. What about recession? Everybody's talking about recession, right? Again, same thing, going into a recession, we're going into a recession. And I'll have people say to me, well, we're going into a recession, so mortgage rates are going to go up. No, that's not true. We have a long history of dealing with recessions. I'm not going to go into this too much, but if you basically look at this graph, those dark bars coming down through the center of the vertically are different recessions, okay? And you can see where we go into a recession, interest rates come down. We're in a recession, interest rates come down. We're in a recession, interest rates come down. Yeah, I mean, it happens every single time. So we're not worried for your customers who are under the misunderstanding that when the recession comes, interest rates are going to go up. It's not true. We've got a historical trend line to show the opposite. Now, let's talk about the mortgage solution for people being afraid of higher rates, or for people being upset about higher interest rates, okay? So this is a national chart. The gentleman that I follow is named Barry Habib. He was like a 3-time Zillow crystal ball reader for reading the market. I listen to his commentary every day, in addition to some others. These are all his graphs, and he speaks to the nation on a national level. So I do want to point out, we're probably not quite here yet in Connecticut from a market condition standpoint, but I always say everything starts out west and moves over east. This will be coming. But there are still pockets where we're seeing it happen. So basically what he's saying is, if you've got a $500,000 purchase price at 80% with 20% down, last year it may have gone $50,000 over asking price. with no terms, right? No home inspections, they're gonna perhaps go cash, even though they need a mortgage, et cetera. Now, what we're seeing a return to throughout the country is a more normal negotiation of just 2% on the $500,000 purchase price, which is about $10,000. Now, there is a mortgage program called a 2-1 buy down, or called buy downs, that unless you've been in real estate, as long as I've been in lending, which is almost 40 years, you've never heard of these, because we used these in the 80s and not since, but they've made a comeback. Because what a 2-1 buy down is let's say today's interest rate is 6.25%, which is actually a pretty good, and that is probably right about where rates are today, 6.25%. With a 2-1 buy down, you can have the borrower come to closing with prepaid interest to bring that interest rate down to 4.25% year one, 5.25% year two, and then years 3 through 30, it's at 6.25%. Okay, it saves $500 a month, and it costs about $10,000. So the discussion here is, and the seller can pay for this. So the discussion here is, if you're in a situation where you've got a buyer who might be trying to negotiate $10,000 off the price, it might be a better use of that $10,000 to have them get into a 2-1 buy down, because it will save them that. And what do we know? Interest rates are going where? Down. So they're going to be refinancing out of this mortgage within a year anyway. So this gets them a lower payment up front. It saves them some money. And any of that money that they've put in towards the buy down when they go to refinance gets applied to their principal balance. It's not like they lose that. Okay. And again, the seller can pay for it. We never want the buyer to pay for it. It would make no sense. Like, why are you going to rob Peter to pay Paul?
Years ago, though, I was wondering this a couple of weeks ago when I was reading about this. Years ago, when you bought down for the life of the loan.
Well, this is called a temporary buy down.
Oh, okay.
Then there's what we call permanent buy downs, which essentially, guys, are paying points, upfront interest to bring that rate down permanently. Now, the thing about a temporary buy down is it doesn't help the borrower qualify. We still have to qualify them at 6.25%. So for those buyers of ours who've been kind of cut and squeezed out of the market because of the higher interest rates, the temporary buy down doesn't help. A permanent buy down does. Because if we're going to bring an interest rate down, like again, in this case, to 5.25%, by having the seller pay the points up front, it's a permanent buy down. And now in this scenario, borrower qualifies for an additional $50,000. Okay, so there's two different ways to approach it based on the unique challenges of that particular market. Does that make sense, Lynn?
In a seller's market, which we still are in because of inventory being so low, how eager are sellers?
We're seeing, like I said, Linda, I agree with you. This isn't really happening a lot, but I have seen it. So it's happening. And then we're going to start talking. We're going to also then start talking a little bit later on about aging inventory, which is still here. And like these properties that are sitting on the market for 90 days, 6 months, because they're right. How we can use some of these strategies to open up the inventory crisis. We'll get into that. Right now, like I said, limited opportunity to use this. But again, this course was entitled Lending Strategies for Every Market. I just want you to know that there's lots of different scenarios that can help. You want to be working with a great lender, right? Because you want somebody who's going to be looking at all these solutions and strategies for you based on the individual nature of the buyer and the seller. Okay. Any questions on this? Cool. Let's go back to higher interest rates. I want to make sure I just covered everything. Buy downs on a lender strategy, combining seller concession in lieu of reduction. So I think we got everything there. Good. Are we in a housing bubble? What's different today, succinctly, that you can share with buyers about today and our real estate market conditions today compared to 2008? Number one, first and foremost, the unemployment rate. So national unemployment right now, I think is sitting at 3.7% as of the year end. I think it was 3.5 in January, and I think in Connecticut, we're around 4.1. Okay. That is a very, very healthy labor market. In the height of the housing crisis, when we did have a housing bubble, unemployment combined with underemployment. I don't know if you remember back then, you had a lot of people being laid off and they could only go and find part-time jobs. Okay, the combination of those two things was 19%, a little over 19%.
Is there underemployment now or no?
Yeah, but I don't even know. It's not worth looking into right now because we're in such a healthy market, but that'd be a cool stat to get.
There's their own point rates.
Well, there's so many weird things going on in the labor market that we can't account for right now. One, you've got like this independent, remote worker mentality where I saw a report that said one of the rising trends now is that remote workers are working 2 full-time jobs.
Yeah, but quietly quitting is a new trend too.
Yeah, quietly quitting. So I'm not sure how the underemployment, but what I want to talk about was in 2008, you had 1 out of 5 American families, 20%, not making enough money to pay their mortgage. 1 out of 5. And we're nowhere near that right now. Lending standards. Was any, I know were you a realtor in 2000?
I was.
Yeah, my buddy. Anybody else a realtor in 2008?
Americans.
You were too, right, Where?
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't understand it. I was like, what does my industry come to? You had a pulse, you got a loan. I'm not exaggerating.
We're just gonna put you on.
No lending standards.
Stated income, stated asset.
Stated income, stated asset, subprime loans, poor credit scores, 100% financing,
110 by the time it was over.
125.
Yeah.
And what kind of product were all of those subprime loans? Adjustable rate mortgages. So what happened is what the subprime market was banking on was that these high interest rate adjustable rate mortgages, which would be resetting after 3, 5, or 7 years, property values would be up and they would just refinance people into another subprime loan. That's where the bet was. And that's where it all went wrong. We're going to talk about adjustable rate mortgages in a minute. Supply and demand. I'm going to give you really compelling stats about how many houses were being built in America in the early 2000s compared to houses that have been being built since the housing crisis. Staggering statistics. Equity in today's home. And I put out a video not too long ago, new conventional loan amount announced for January of 2023, $726,000. That was a 12% increase year over year. One of the largest increases in the conventional loan amount. And here's my point. We know that the federal government has access to the best economists in the world. And we know that the federal government also doesn't ever want to be in a housing crisis again, because it took this country to its knees economically. If there was any concern that housing prices were going to come down, we would not see increasing conventional loan rates. Okay, it wouldn't be happening. I don't believe. In 2005, 2 out of every 5 mortgages had an adjustable rate. Those are the subprime loans, 2 out of 5. Today, less than 1 out of 100. So we do not have the same lending issue today that we had back then.
Just curious, I don't know if this even helps anyone, but do we think that's because of increase in regulation or just increase of morality because of like?
Oh, no, it's definitely, oh, no, it's definitely the increase of regulation.
So it's not a morality thing for people. All right.
Yeah, you bring that product back, nobody's gonna remember the lessons they learned. Buyer's mentality. So true story, I didn't do subprime loans. I mean, I was an old fashioned banker, right? I was like, I'd sit in front of a couple and say, so let me understand this. You have not been able to save any money on the money that you make, and you pay $1,000 in rent, but you want me to give you a new mortgage for $2,500, but you can afford it, just because you can get it. Yep. But can you share with me, like, what is it that I don't know? And they, this couple basically told me to mind my own business, and they would go down the street and get a subprime mortgage. I couldn't understand how these mortgages were going to perform, which is less of a concern to me than the idea that an American family could lose their home. And we know what happened afterward.
And a lot of them were tricked into it too, though.
There was
Yeah,
absolutely,
a lot of people just
there-
didn't know better.
yeah, there was absolutely predatory lending that took place in the marketplace, and there was absolutely an entitlement among other buyers. I don't know what the percentages were. I would never guess. I came across both.
Now, I don't want to hijack your presentation or
That's
anything
fine.
like that, but I do want to ask a question.
Yeah.
Maybe right now is not the time to have the discussion, but although maybe there's an increase in regulations in this industry, when we compare it like across the economic trends, I mean, like household debt income, household debt is substantially up. I mean, student loan debt is substantially up. I mean,
That's coming out of
corporate-
slide.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'm jumping
Yeah,
in.
no, you're fine.
I'm trying to, because I wasn't a realtor in 2008. I wasn't even an entrepreneur, like on a scale that I am. So
Were
I'm
you
trying to, like,
born in 2008?
so I'm trying to like piece it all together, which is obviously above my pay grade, and that's why the head economists have to do what they do. Like, okay, yeah, this makes it look good, but in reality, where are we right now? And I'm just trying to do it for my own personal finances.
Well, here's what I can tell you. Here's what I can say to that point, right? So part of this is my own personal approach. It's not common, but whenever I'm talking with especially first-time buyers, I always have a dual conversation with them. I always start by saying, great news, here's what you can qualify for. And they'll either be happy or disappointed regardless. Well, actually not regardless. If they're excited about that, I'm like, but let's drill down on the numbers right now, because this is going to equate to a whatever percent increase over what you're accustomed to paying. Are you comfortable? The language I actually use in my mortgage practice is, where's your comfort payment? Because even though I can get you maybe $3,000 a month in a mortgage payment, if you're telling me you're comfortable at $2,500, we got to back into that number. Okay. Similarly, when I still have these same conversations today, when somebody's upset because they don't qualify for as much as they thought or as much as they want, I'll have the discussion like, same thing, you're paying this in rent. You feel like you can go to this. Let's talk about your savings history. Let's talk about your other debt. What's happening that makes you feel comfortable? Because let's be honest, the financial education in this country is terrible. Terrible. And we're going to get into a pretty robust, you're going to see me get all worked up and my face is going to get flushed when we get to the student loan discussion, but it's important.
I think one of the big things too from 2005, and we saw it trending, was there were a ton of first payment calls.
Exactly.
Buying houses and didn't realize they had to make mortgage.
Correct.
Like that's like, and you laugh, no, and I mean, but it's just, that was the education of the consumer at the time. And what happened with 2005 and 2006, and I think our crash actually happened a little bit later.
It did.
We're slow, we were more like 7 and 8.
Correct.
But there was a buildup, a slow equity buildup from like 2002 all the way through the crash, where this one's also a little different because it happened so quickly. But there were so many first payment defaults, and I don't know, if you had those numbers, but the thing too was there were first payment defaults, but foreclosures take so long. So people were being foreclosed, but actually having equity because it was a 6 or 7 or 5 year buildup. Where here, this was really like 18 months. And that was one of the big things that happened then too. People didn't realize they had to make a mortgage payment. Well, I bought the house.
Right.
Well, I gave you $25,000
Right.
for closing. What do you mean I have to pay somebody every month?
Correct.
Well, this is more money than I was paying in rent. Why do I have to pay this?
Correct.
And so-
That's true. It seems outrageous, but it is true. The other thing I think compelling stat is in 2008, this was the average equity in homes nationally. In 2008, it was 19%. Look at where we are today. 58%. So here's the question, right? So what happened in 2008? I always refer to 2008 because that's when Connecticut felt it. Dave's right. It really started in 05 out 06 in California, Arizona. You want to know more about that market? Has anybody seen the movie The Big Short? Does a really great job illustrating what was going on. I cried. I'm not kidding you. I was with my kids. I started to cry. I was like, oh, what is wrong? I'm like, like, it was very, very upsetting. But here, one of the things that started happening was strategic foreclosures. You had these subdivisions in Nevada where they're all cookie cutter homes. They're all the same. A lot of them financed with subprime homes going into foreclosure. And you've got a handful of people who can still afford to make their payments, but they're watching their equity and property values plummet. And they know they're never going to get out of it unless they walk away from the property, which created more foreclosures. So it was really a horrible time, but you're going to walk away. If you're experiencing hardship, walking away from 19% is a lot different than walking away from 58% of equity in your property.
And it's like a negative feedback loop, like we're dealing with our environmental issues, by the way. So keep that out there.
Yep. And then finally, these statistics are mind-blowing. Like, if you really want to understand why we have an inventory shortage, and none of you were in one of my classes in 2017, but I told you we were going to be here. I told you two things. Let me get out of the way. Two things. I said, one, we're going to wind up with an inventory shortage. And two, when we convert to a seller's market, and we will, I said this to a room full of realtors, you're going to wish you were never born. I'm like, I know it sounds great to have a seller's market, but it creates interesting challenges that have a stress level unlike being in a buyer's market. Unlike being in a buyer's market. And I've had a number of realtors from back then call me and say, oh my God, I remember when you said this. And I was like, give me a seller's market. That's all I want. And it's like, I'm so sick of this. So what happened was I want to make sure I'm looking at my chart. Okay. If you look at 1995, right up to that first red line, which is essentially 2004, builders were building a lot of houses in America. A lot of houses. And this is taking place at the same time that subprime lending is happening. Okay. So you had high demand, you had lots of inventory because builders were building. What happens in those years, 2005, 6, 7, 8, we see we're still building. But then when the crash came, what did builders do? They stopped building houses. They stopped building houses. And if you start looking at those green lines and where the trend was, we were not building enough houses to keep up with what we call household formations, which are people who are entering in the opportunity to buy real estate. And then what's the other phenomenon that's happening during this time? You got millennials coming into the market. When you look at US births by year, and these are the generations, right? And from an economic data predictor standpoint, we say that 33 years old is the average age that people buy their first home in America. You look at back in 2006, 33-year-olds, were still part of Gen X. But then you start looking at the millennial population and when it started peaking. We are in the peak right now of when millennials are 33 years old. These next several years are our peak years. And yet we have a shortage of 3.8 million homes in America. So this inventory, and what's happened because of the pandemic? We saw new construction start to get healthy again, but then it pulled back. Why? Supply chain issues, can't find a window in America if your life depends on it. We see it falling back.
Costs so much to build. Right? So this basically just demonstrates for you that inventory challenges, I think, are going to be, I'm hoping not at this pace, certainly, but it's going to take us a while to catch up. It's going to take us a while to catch up.
And by a while, we mean a few years, like, we're talking probably, from what I've heard, again, this is like those lines, right? But based on the data you're presenting, people are saying it's gonna be lasting inventory shortage to like almost 2030, like.
Yeah, I've heard predictions of anywhere from 5 to 10 years.
Well, part of the problem with that is the cost to build. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. The 1,200 square foot ranch will no longer be built. They're too costly. Builders don't make money on them. The site work, the utilities, the building standards now, that house you can't make money on. So you're forcing first-time home buyers into the existing inventory. Or you're forcing first-time home buyers to not be able to buy a home until they're well-established into the mid to late 30s. I mean, that's what the trend is now. New homes, you will never see new home construction under $300,000 again, unless they're condos or some sort of spec build.
That's so interesting. That's so interesting, Dave.
Not in Connecticut, you won't see it.
Yeah,
I mean, you're in the 240 to 250 a square foot to build right now, and that's just a standard basic thing. You know, sheetrock is sheetrock. So when you build in, you know, a lower price point city or town like New Haven or Hamden, maybe even parts of North Haven, you know, you're building a 1,200 square foot ranch, it's gonna price you out of the market. You're into your mid threes,
wow.
right?
Well, what about even, inventory for land? Is there?
It's too expensive to build. The land
I don't
guys,
even know if there's enough land around.
there is, the land guys drop significantly. Significantly.
Because it's so expensive to build,
Because
it's not
too
worth it.
expensive to build.
And the ranch issue has been like 20 years, it's been the same issue.
Yeah, I mean,
And there's no rhyme or reason in that market. I'll give you a true story. I have one of my best friends bought property up in one of the limes. I never remember if it's Old, East, or Lime. And she had a builder to build this beautiful, like, dream home of hers. Ran into some problems with the builder right up front. Found another builder whose estimate came in $1 million over. You're like, how is there $1 million difference between these two bids? I think you're like, what is going on here?
So it's safe to say one of those lines left the sour taste in it.
Dad joke. Dad cut. All right. So we talked about the media before. Let's revisit this. These are true headlines from one particular TV commentator who has been spreading fear about the housing bubble all the way back to 2015. Okay, housing bubble in 2015, larger than 2006. We're in a new housing bubble. Home ownership doesn't build wealth, study finds. I'm going to give you the correct statistic on that. It's better to rent than to buy in today's housing market. The housing market is about to shift in a bad way. Next year, I mean, these are the headlines, okay? And along this right-hand side of this slide is the average national, not Connecticut, but you could do this easily in Connecticut, what the average national appreciation is. So if you're a buyer who's listening to this woman and you're not buying a house dating back to 2015, your $300,000 house now costs $523,000. It's just bad publicity, okay? And it's our jobs to make sure people understand the facts. And people say, the other thing that people say is, well, housing always collapses. I actually got into a debate with a realtor who sends me quite a bit of business on this. We're gonna go into a recession. There's no way the Fed can bring us in on a soft landing, and housing always drops value in recessions. Well, again, Case-Shiller, National House Price Index, we see that that's not the case. The only time during a recession that we dropped property values was when?
2008.
2008. You can see it here. We know why that happened. But in any other normal economic period of time in history where we're in a recession, property values hold. They either hold or they continue to rise.
You have a copy of this graph.
I'm gonna send all this to you.
This graph is amazing, right?
I'm gonna send it all to you, okay? So basically, again, I just want to arm you with enough information that when you get that into that conversation, you've got information that you can be conversive about. Real estate doesn't build wealth. This is according to Kiplinger. okay? These are net worth tiers. So the top 1% of Americans who have the highest net worth, 10.8 million, you see these numbers. Which gives you the top 10%. The top 10% of Americans have an average net worth of $800,000. However, on average, 2/3 of that net worth comes from equity in the home. Okay, the other statistic I saw is that the average net worth of a homeowner is 10 times that of a renter. Okay, so pretty compelling stats. Lack of inventory. We're going to talk about a lot right now about millennials and HGTV. We're going to talk about aging inventory. One of the strategies that we've been employing a lot, I don't have slides on this, but I just wanted to, I put it here so that I could remember to tell you, is to Alan's point, and I think I've got it on the next slide. I do, let's just go here. Oh goodness, I didn't know I was doing this. Hold on, let me get these all up. Yeah. Okay. So we talked about the fact millennials are coming in. 70% of all transactions in the next several years will include a millennial buyer or seller. The average liquid savings in savings accounts today that a millennial has is $11,000. Their average retirement is $37,000. 79% have student loan debt, and the average student loan debt is, this was actually supposed to be $120,000.
Wow.
Student loan debt and the ability to buy a house are intersecting issues, okay? So one of the things that we've recently introduced is a new program, just to give you perspective. And just like people were ignorant to the idea that they had to make their mortgage payments, it's shocking to me how many people don't understand how their student loan works. They're excited their student loan is in deferment, and they don't realize that creates a negative amortization problem for them. They do not understand this. And secondarily, they have not researched different opportunities to lower their student loan payments. Okay, so we've got a brand new program that we have access to, which a buyer and somebody who's got student loan debt can go onto this platform, and it will come back and tell them different options for them to lower their student loan debt to help them qualify for financing.
That's incredible.
It's fantastic.
That is so good.
It's fantastic. Okay.
And once you have equity, you can refinance and.
Pay off your student loan debt. I did a lot of that.
That's what I did with my kids.
Quick question about that. Is that like a separate software that you have that's like a blend link almost that you can share with us that we can send out to people?
Well, you have to, I don't know. Let me find that out.
Okay.
I know I can offer it to my customers, whether I can give it to you to offer to yours, I will find out.
Well, what I'm saying is, this is just my business mind, right?
Oh, yeah.
If your company did that and it was a separate blend link that we as realtors could share on your behalf, and then they had to put in their information.
It's
that
not,
would get-
it's a service that we purchased.
Yeah,
So, but that's a great
but I'm
question.
just
I'll
saying,
find out.
it would be a
I know.
very top funnel for you.
No, I agree.
And, you
I
know,
agree.
Is that just private loans or does it? include
It's federal.
The federal loans are.
You can only, it gives you options on your federal loans.
Mhm.
Okay. What I have to tell you is, so I started doing this little piece of this presentation I'm about to give you now. I started doing in 2017 because I had an aha moment. So my daughter wanted to buy a first house, and she wanted a perfect house. Okay, a perfect house. I don't want to have to do anything. We need a perfect house. She found a perfect house. And then, because I'm an old-fashioned mom, my kids come over every Sunday for dinner. Every Sunday, she and my daughter-in-law, who had also just bought a house, would put on HGTV, Chip and Joanna Gaines, and my daughter started talking about how she was gonna rip her house apart. I was like, but you wanted a perfect house. I hate it. I hate everything about it. And slowly over the years, this girl has replaced her kitchen, her baths. Now she was talking about doing an addition. So it's very interesting to me what the mindset is of the millennial buyer. Now, there's two other kind of psychology things that are happening with millennial buyers. The first is their definition of old is a lot different than ours. Am I right?
Yeah.
So I have one buyer, this was my aha moment. One buyer said to me, I found a house, but it's pretty old. We're gonna have to do something with it. I go, wow, how old is it? Now I'm thinking, what are you thinking?
It's 1970.
100 years old.
I'm thinking 1950,
Yeah.
30s, 40, yeah. I'm talking 2008.
2000.
Yeah.
House was built in 2000. I was like, 2000, dude, what are you talking about? I don't want to be like a mom to these people. Like, come on. Then I started thinking about it. I had renovated a house in 2000, my own home, which I subsequently had sold. And I was thinking, I wouldn't put a single design element in 2017 into my new house that I used in 2000.
No, it's totally different.
Completely different. 17 years, crazy for us. The other thing is, there was this interesting trend with millennials that has actually reversed itself. So the first is a lot of millennial kids, especially in Connecticut, especially in some of the markets that we all serve, Milford, Madison, right? Grew up in 4-bedroom colonials. Big 4-bedroom colonials. Now you start running numbers for them on 2-bedroom capes. They're not happy. They are not happy with these little houses. The trend was okay for a while until the pandemic. And now there was a big concern in 2017 that all the McMansions were never going to sell because the millennials didn't want the big houses. But the pandemic hits, and what's the new phenomenon? Work at home. So everybody wants the 4 bedrooms, even if they don't have somebody to put in that bedroom, because mom and dad both need offices. Both need offices. So all of a sudden, we've seen millennials mindset on how big a house is really turn around because now everybody's working from home.
Yeah, we went from urban desire to suburban.
Correct.
There was a huge urban.
There was that's what I was like, all these houses are never gonna sell, the millennials aren't coming back. Well, two things happened, they started having babies and living in their 2-bedroom, I've got friends right now, living in their 2-bedroom condo with 2 kids in Boston isn't really cutting it. And now they're starting to look for $1 million homes, extra, $1.5 million homes in suburbs of Boston.
I'm gonna date myself here, but I used to be in the medical field, and this was back in the early 80s. A patient said to me, he had 2 daughters, one had just had a baby. And he said, my kids didn't see my wife when I struggled, 1-bedroom apartment. He goes, my daughter thinks that she's gonna step out of our house and have what she is accustomed to
Correct.
or better.
Correct.
And the other thing is, a lot of these young kids are not learning how to renovate.
Oh, we're
My husband, like,
girlfriend, you are setting me up perfectly here.
we
So-
do everything, but these kids.
Yeah, they don't know how to do it.
And they are coming from an instant world.
Correct.
They Google, they
Absolutely.
drive up. you get your
Absolutely.
lunch, you get food.
Absolutely. Well, then we see these 2 stats, right? First time buyers spend an average of $33,000 on home improvement, and 55% of homeowners today report they're planning to renovate. So. Okay, then you look at these 2 and the impact they've had on.
I can't
it's-
even envision a wall cover when people walk in the house. They're like, I don't like.
I know. So Chip and Joanna Gaines they launched a new series in October of this year. They had 4.5 million linear viewers on the opening of that show. Linear meaning tuned into the TV to watch it when it was airing versus being able to stream it later or find it later. I mean, that's astronomical. Their audience is upscale women and millennials with an average age of 25 to 45. They've got 9.7 million, oh, there's a nice typo, millions of Instagram followers. When I edited this presentation from my earlier presentations, the number was in the $3 million mark. So over just a few short years, they've tripled their Instagram followers. It's an empire built on renovation. Their net worth exceeds $50 million. And I used to say renovation financing, which everybody's afraid of, closes the gap between reality and reality TV. And then we go to this. I loved this meme. HGTV. I work part-time at a daycare and my husband breeds salamanders. Our budget 1.3 million. Because what these shows never show you are the finances of it, right? So I want to, because we have some things to consider when we think about renovation loans. Now, don't tune me out yet based on current market conditions, because I have a strategy for you about this. So one, Connecticut rental market is inflationary, right? The average is $1,700. How are millennials gonna find their HGTV home in Connecticut? Per HUD, 1 out of 3 properties in the Northeast needs updating. We have the oldest inventory in America, not 2000, but literally, okay? We have weather conditions, both hot and cold, that have an impact on our properties and maintenance. This statistic, I think, is compelling because what you have to understand is every year after the housing crisis, I would watch where Connecticut would rank on equity recapture. And up until 2019, we always ranked 15th.
No.
So getting our equity back came much later
No,
than it did other parts of the country. There were other parts of the country that had already experienced real estate booms before the pandemic. That wasn't happening in Connecticut. When I was talking to everybody in 2018, 2017, we were all bemoaning the fact, right, that our equity hadn't come back, that homeowners were fleeing the state of Connecticut because of pension issues, right? We were losing population at alarming rates. The Connecticut real estate market was doomed. I mean, this was the sentiment. I was involved in a couple of meetings with state legislators who were concerned about this. Okay, that's turned around, but other parts of the country had already experienced it. And then they got the lift that we got during the housing market. I happen to think that means when we're talking about a bubble, Connecticut is that 50th ranking keeps us like #1 for not having a housing bubble. If it's going to work to our advantage, if you will. Yeah, and I think, I don't remember if it was Zillow or there was was it Redfin? Oh gosh, I wish I had the statistic exactly for you. Basically ranked Hartford County as the #1 real estate market for 2023 in America.
Yeah.
Hartford County.
Yeah, West Hartford. Boom.
Okay, because for all the reasons that I'm talking about. #1 in Connecticut, and New Haven County, I think was in the top 15. I'll have to find that and send it to you. You know, the lack of equity during those years, what did that mean? A lot of people weren't spending a lot of money in their houses. The #1 place people get money to renovate and update their houses is out of the equity of their homes. So we didn't have the equity recapture, the equity wasn't there, deferred maintenance grew in Connecticut. And now we have the inventory shortage. So here's what I want to kind of be provocative about. We did this, my admin did this for me yesterday off of a Zillow search. So bear with me, these are not Connecticut MLS stats, this is a Zillow search. But when we look at the total number of listings that are on the market and we peel out aging inventory, right? That crisis is even more dramatic. But let's talk about the aging inventory for a minute. Oh, I got a nice little note. Lunch has arrived. Would you like to take a break so the attendees can grab food? Rach, I love you. We'll talk about it right after this. We'll definitely grab our lunches right after this. So what I would say to you is, can we create inventory for millennial buyers who we know are open-minded to renovation? They're ignorant about how to do it. I don't mean ignorant in a bad way. I don't know how to, I don't mean that in a bad way. They just don't have the education on how to do it, okay? But can we look at some of these properties and create the perfect house for them using renovation finance? That's my, I'm wondering if we can do this. And we've seen it a bit. This is one I did during the pandemic. I had a couple, they wanted a colonial. There were no colonials for sale. So they bought a cape and we made it a colonial using a renovation. Okay, there's so many stories like this. Okay, we've turned this cape into colonial. I've got one right now in construction phase phase, right? They're in the construction phase. They're adding an enormous in-law apartment to their home because they couldn't find one. They searched and searched. Dad and mom need to come live with them. They couldn't find one. Additions, I've done several multifamily restorations over the last 5 years. Many new kitchens and baths. It's really important when we're thinking about this, that you guys understand, and this is why you're so important in this transaction, is that the repairs need to add that, the renovation and repairs need to add value to the property. Do roofs themselves, new roofs, well, septic, mechanicals, do not typically add value. Why?
It's a necessity.
They're a necessity. The presumption is you've got a working one. When the Connecticut crumbling foundation issue started, Michael brought me in to have a conversation about how could we use renovation loans to fix the crumbling foundation issue. But the challenge was people were still buying those homes, and the cost of fixing the crumbling foundation was not reflected in sales prices. People weren't taking $150,000 less on their homes so that they could handle the crumbling foundation issue. So we didn't have that opportunity. So it's important when we're looking at these aging properties that if they've been sitting there for a long time, we need a price reduction to account, in that case, to account for
Structural, mechanical.
correct, those types of repairs. You're not gonna be able to pay top market and get a rental loan for a new roof and think you're gonna be able to pull the value out. Okay, makes sense? So why don't we take a break here, and then I'll go through how this program works a little bit with you. So have you guys get your lunch and come back and sit, and we'll have a working lunch.
This meeting is being recorded.
Perfect. So this original presentation, when we first started the RAMP program before the pandemic, was about renovation financing. The reason I wanted to tailor it was because it became, so let me back up and explain something to you. So after an entire career where I was not a producing loan officer, back in 2017, I made the decision to go back into production. I was always I've always been in management, and I decided to do both. My kids were older. I was up for the challenge. Okay, great. But the challenge was that, I've got, most of you know, Mark Wooten or Gerard McGuinness, loan officers who the Lisa and Michelle team, who, really own that market. So I didn't want to step on their toes because they worked for me. That wouldn't have been cool. So what I decided to do was really become an expert in renovation loans, because a lot of loan officers are terrible at this, and a lot of realtors were afraid of it. But this whole millennial mindset was very intriguing to me, and I'm not going to lie, I really caught the beginning of a trend. So what I wanted to do was get out and talk to as many realtors as I could about renovation financing, so they wouldn't be afraid if a pre-approval letter of mine came over on an offer. This was during a buyer's market with a renovation loan. And that first year I did 150 renovation presentations.
Wow.
Like, I became known as the renovation guru. Then what happened is, right now we've converted into a seller's market. And in most cases, sellers, we can't even get an FHA or VA contract offer accepted in most cases, let alone a reno. So that whole approach kind of got put on the wayside, other than all of a sudden working with clients who were being forced to buy homes that didn't really meet their needs, and us doing a renovation loan afterward. So this concept of a renovation refi became really popular for me during the pandemic, because people would go ahead and buy the house and then spend time lining up their contractors and whatnot, and then we would refinance them into a renovation loan. So it's important to just know that when we're doing a renovation loan, either upfront to purchase a property, and this is why I think it's interesting to look at some of the aging inventory combined with this program, is we're going to evaluate the repairs and renovations. And these really fall into three distinct categories. The first is, what are the appraiser mandated repairs? What are the things that an appraiser is going to pick up when they get out to this property and say has to be fixed? Okay. Because those always have to be included. And then the second is, what do the buyers or the homeowners want to renovate? REO are the utilities on. We still see some REO properties, certainly, thankfully, nowhere near where we used to. But if you are selling a bank-owned property, or we've got a buyer looking at a bank-owned property, we have to know whether or not the utilities are on, because we've got to account for the mechanicals in the property, right? Step two is we do a true pre-qualification or pre-approval now based on the renovation. So what we do, if we're going to do it at the time of the purchase, we're going to take the purchase price plus the renovation amount from the contractor's bid, plus a contingency reserve of anywhere between 10 to 20%. And we're basically going to call that the total acquisition cost. And that's the number we lend on. So the reason that doing a renovation loan is so impactful is because we base our lending decision on the future value of the home, not on the current value. A common conversation I have with people is, well, I've got about $25,000 worth of equity in my home. Maybe I should just use that. And I'm like, can you get it? Right? Because if you go for a home equity loan, you still have to keep 20% equity in your house. You probably can't get that equity out.
That was and you're probably gonna answer it in step 3. What is the loan value
Correct.
off of the
I will get
renovation?
Yep. Okay, so that's the total acquisition cost. Step 3, we will get to this, is you want to select your contractor or contractors, and you want to obtain work orders. And we accept quotes from Home Depot and Lowe's. So that's kind of a really cool distinction too. And I'm going to show you an example of what we did recently. Okay. Now, most realtors only know the 203K program. It's the only one. You'll hear people say, they'll call me, they'll say, I need a 203K loan. I'm like, are you an FHA buyer? Do you know you need an FHA loan program? Because there's some inherent challenges to those. Just realized this didn't all come up. There it is. What we do, we have 24 different renovation loan programs. FHA, conventional, VA, we have USDA renovation loan programs, and we have what's known as escrow holdback programs. So the reason we say that is, I'm looking, most lenders only do the FHA 203K. So we've got some great conventional buyers who get pigeonholed into that program, which is more expensive because it happens to be the only loan that a particular lender offers. So it's important to know that we can do all sorts of conventional loans. Now, on a 203K loan, we went back to Alan's question about what's the minimum down payment. It's 3.5% of that total acquisition cost. Okay, so we take purchase price, renovations, contingency. We treat that now as the total acquisition cost. We can lend up to 96.5% on an FHA loan. They need 3.5% down on that total cost. Conventionally, this is actually, these are wrong. Something did not take when I edited this slide. So on a conventional, sometimes we can do 3% down on a conventional renovation loan if the borrower is a first-time home buyer and or is under certain income thresholds. The loan max, guys, is the $720,000 number that I shared with you earlier. This tells you this slide was originally from 2017. Look at how much it's gone up. Okay. So the reason we don't want to put somebody in an FHA, well, first of all, the FHA loans have extra costs to them, but also we have a huge difference in the loan amount. I can't tell you how many times like somebody really has to use a 203K but because of our max loan amount, we can't get them to where they need to be on a rental loan. Does that make sense? So we look at the whole client first and decide are they conventional or FHA borrower, and then we tailor the rental loan around that. In the case of a 203K FHA loan, if a property under appreciates, we can actually lend up to under appraises, we can actually lend in some cases up to 110%. And this is because HUD wants people improving their homes. Now, rental talking points. As I said, 24 different rental programs. Biggest misconception that people have about rental loans is they think it's two separate loans. They think they get their traditional mortgage and then they get the rental piece. It's one loan. The contractors must be registered with us, which means we need their licenses, we need their insurance. And while we don't do a background check, we do a simple Google search. So if anything shows up on a Google search about them, we have one builder who showed up as a felon in a Google search. That's the only time we ever had any problem with it. It's going to be, and the thing that I always stress to the contractors are, we're going to need paperwork from you. We make it as painless as possible, but we're going to make paper. We're going to need paperwork because contractors hate paperwork. The quote must be itemized. They can't. I had one guy send in all these different, addition to house 120,000. Like that's not going to work.
No details.
Similarly, I rescued a rental loan from another lender. And when I got the quote, I said to the builder, oh my God, this is the most detailed quote I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it was how many paint cans, how many paintbrushes. And he said, the other lender made me do that. So we're not insane about it. The tip that I have to say is if you're working with a buyer, or in your case as the realtor, the first question I always ask is, do you have a contractor? Or more importantly, please tell me you have a contractor. Because getting contractors today is really, really difficult, which is why timing a rental loan right now with the purchase is really difficult. So unless somebody currently has a contractor or you as their agent have contractors you can recommend, we're probably going to change this and look at the rental refi option that I've told you about, where we let them buy the house. It gives them time to get into the house, live in the house, figure out exactly what they want to do, and then we reno them.
Is there a time frame?
No,
So that it doesn't matter if they're there 3 months, 6 months.
correct. Now, I always tell people, if you're gonna do this, it would be great to try to get some semblance of a quote up front. Because the last thing we want to do is put a buyer in a house that they've bought thinking they can renovate, and they have no knowledge of what those renovations are going to cost. So maybe it's not the contractor they pick. Maybe it's not the contractor can't take the job. Like we need some. I would not want to close on a purchase transaction for a client if they didn't have some idea what the cost was going to be. Like I said, use my friend as an example, $1 million variance. And what we are seeing, I say price gouging, that's probably not a very nice way to say it, but contractors are at a premium right now. They can charge a lot of money. And we're seeing that. And when we have those kinds of bids, we're not going to get the appraised value we need. So it does make a difference on which contractor you're using. Okay. The couple that I just told you about that that are doing the in-law addition, it took them 18 months to get a contractor lined up, and the spread in those quotes, the renovation is $100,000, and their quotes ranged from $100,000 to I think it was $225,000. So it's crazy. However, it's definitely a viable option for us to look at with aging inventory. Now, one of the things that I have been thinking about doing, but if I was a realtor who didn't have contractors and needed contractors, we're talking about putting on an event we call it Burger and Beer. We're like at your little local, bar You invite a bunch of contractors in, everybody gets a burger, everybody gets a couple beers. You spend a few minutes, we spend a few minutes talking about all this great business they can get and see if we can't come up with contractors. I had a large number of contractors that are approved with us, who were, because we can give out our approved list. But again, most of them evaporated during the most recent market conditions. You know, again, my goal was to make realtors comfortable with the program, right? There's reputation concerns. Has anybody ever done a rent loan? Yeah, you have. But yours went well, you said.
Yeah.
Yours?
I've done a few, yeah, and they all end up working out.
Yeah.
They're paying.
Did you do them with PrimeLending?
One with PrimeLending.
Okay,
Brian Williams.
yeah, so, because we are really known, like, to rock this way
The
so.
best.
But a lot of realtors, when you ask that question, if they've done one, they'll say, I don't ever want to do another one again. Okay. Maybe there's concerns over how to write the contract. That's very easy. Realtors get very hung up on how to write a contract for a rental loan because the math on your front page of your contract doesn't add up. All you have to do is call me. We'll explain to you how it's done. They're concerned about the additional work. There is additional work that goes along with a property and a project like this on you, a shortage of contractors. But I would challenge you and say, consider the service you're providing. Borrowers today don't have extra savings, and renovating the property gives them the additional value they need to be able to do it. So again, I think when we look at the inventory issues, it's important. Now, this I'm showing you because people don't believe me when I tell them. I would stand up here and say I can close a renovation loan if they have a contractor bid in 2 weeks. And I would literally have realtors say, no way, you can't do that. I'm like, oh yeah. And then as it turned out, some of my clients had posted reviews for me. We kind of went through all my reviews for this presentation. We're like, oh, there's one, right? So let me start by saying we did a rehab loan on an REO. I was not confident in my lender, decided to switch to Kelly 13 business days before the closing. What do you know about an REO contract? Time is of the essence. You have to close it on that date. These people were going to be at risk of losing their deposit because their other lender wasn't getting the job done. So I took the deal 13 days. We got the clear to close a full week before our scheduled day. It took me 5 days. Okay. There's a lot of firepower that we have in this. This is another one. Construction during COVID, and they got us closed fast. Even our realtor, this was in New York, even our realtor couldn't believe how fast we got to close into the rental loan. And then this is another one, again, that showed we got the entire process done in 2 weeks. So they're easy. It's easy to be nervous about these properties and about these transactions. And again, there's not an abundance of them now unless we're looking at aging inventory. But if you're working with buyers who are getting frustrated and you're kind of paying attention to what some of the aging inventory is, listen, you're not going to go out and sell 50 homes in the next 3 months using aging inventory, but you might do a couple. We might create an opportunity here that that's not here in the moment without this program. Okay. When we were doing this a lot in 2017, 2018, and 2019 before the pandemic, there's a lot of really cool ways you can market a property that needs renovation. I mean, Alan does it when he's doing his flips. I mean, there's just, you can get design boards in. We had a designer who had just come out of design school. She was doing a lot of pro bono work on these properties and said, there's just a lot of really cool ways you can market them and get to where you need to go. I'm going to just give you this quick, I give this to people so that, because is there anybody here who sold a house to a millennial and didn't have their parents involved?
Actually,
It's
you're
rare.
born.
It's rare.
Yeah.
So here's something, so this is a common thing I do a lot of financial consultations with clients, sorry, Alan, a lot of financial consultations, and the parents are on the phone. And what I hear most often is, I could buy a house. When I bought my first house, I paid $155,000 for it. So this is a true story. This is actually an argument I had with one of my girlfriends who lives in Madison, who basically was like, how are my kids ever going to be able to afford a property? My first house on Wildcat Road was $155,000. And we were like at a great restaurant. I was drinking wine. I was like, hold on, let me get my phone out, my calculator. I'm like, you remember what your first rate is? Because everybody remembers their first interest rate. 14%. I'm like, well, you're 155 at 14% equals 1815 in principal and interest. At 5.5%, which is where we think rates will get to between 5 and 5.5%, that buys a house at 319,000. And God forbid we stay at 6.5%, that buys them a house at 289. I said, the wine's on you. P.S. I did all 3 of her kids' mortgages. Okay.
The wine's on you.
But it's true, like parents have this preconceived notion. And when you start, again, you don't just, it's a matter of being willing to have an open dialogue and get more information, but this is a true story. And we hear this a lot from people. The other thing I'll say to the parents during the financial consultation call is, did you have student loans? We had to buy a house with 20% down. You had to have 20% down in my day. That's what we should be doing in America. Like, well, we did think about that coming out of the housing crisis, that we realized that would have collapsed the entire real estate economy in the country. And number 2, did you have student loan debt? No, you were paying student loans, mom and dad? Did that help you save more money?
Also, median income is substantially lower.
Correct, correct. And you look at the median income comparisons, I've got 5 charts for those I don't even have in here. It's a whole nother story. So just kind of something I like to show. Multiple offers versus cash offers, pre-qualification versus a pre-approval. So a couple things I want you to know, and you've heard me say this before. A pre-qualification or a pre-approval, whatever it says on the letter you're getting, is only as good as the loan officer who's issued it. So my initial letter says pre-qualification, because we believe it's not a pre-approval unless I've put you into underwriting and approved your loan with an underwriter. Despite the fact that I'm really well known in the marketplace for doing a thorough pre-approval letter. People will call me. Lots of agents during the pandemic said, the only reason this client got this house, Kelly, is because it was your pre-approval letter. Like it's the golden ticket. Because I do everything up front. I'm looking at credit, I'm looking at income, I'm looking at assets, I'm running the loan through automated underwriting. True story, I rescued a loan last year from Citibank. I don't mind saying Citibank because they're a big bank. I had to rescue the loan because the pre-approval letter, their pre-approval letter, they'd never even pulled credit. So your pre-approval and pre-qualification, the way I describe it is, doesn't matter what it says on the letter. The question is, have they been approved in underwriting? Because that's a new opportunity, guys, that we've never had before in mortgage lending. And that came as a direct result of the inventory crisis. It costs a lot of money to have an underwriter sit there and underwrite a loan that's not in contract. But as our market shifted and lenders came out of the refinance market and we saw the need of our real estate partners to be able to compete with cash offers or in multiple bid situations, we decided we would retain underwriters and have them underwrite true pre-approvals. So today, when we send that out, that's basically what we're doing. And I'm going to show you an example. The other thing is there's a mortgage guideline called delayed financing. So if you have somebody who has to pay, who has cash that they can pay on the property, or their family member can give them cash to pay for the property, we can then put a mortgage on afterward using better terms than treating it as what ordinarily would have been called a cash out refinance. It's called delayed financing. We have it, and it's a solution. I used it multiple times over the last 3 years to help solve for this phenomenon of multiple offers and cash buyers. Now, this is what we call our pre-approval process, where it goes into underwriting. It's a true pre-approval. Our goal is always to get it clear to close, subject only to the appraisal and the contract. Now, let me ask you, did any of you do a loan in the last 3 years where the lender called and said they didn't need an appraisal?
Yeah.
Right, that's called an appraisal waiver. So what happens is, if somebody's putting a decent down payment and they've got excellent credit, there's a 25% chance when we run that property through the automated underwriting system, we're not going to need an appraisal. But so what we do now is you call us and tell us a borrower that we're working with is interested in this property. We'll go in and actually run it because we've got the full pre-approval and see if they get an appraisal waiver. And if that's the case, you then go in to be able to make the offer, waiving the appraisal. Very cool, right? Very, very cool. There's a lot of lenders who won't do this. I just want to say. Now, the other thing, the only way this really works, and trust me, I've got case study after case study after case study on it, is the lender, this case, when we know our client who has a full approval is making an offer, we'll say to you, Maura, let me know when you submit the offer. And on Saturday and Sunday, I spend a lot of my time calling listing agents to say, I just want to make sure you understand. If I call, I wouldn't have to call Linda, although I would, because if Linda saw my pre-approval letter, she would know. But we call every listing agent and say, we want to make sure you're aware. We essentially are clear to close. All we need is the contract and an appraisal. And we know that increases it doesn't work every time, of course, but it does increase the opportunity for our buyer to get that deal. Now, imagine doing that if you've got an FHA or a VA buyer. Imagine doing that. So I'm very angry that our VA buyers especially have not been able to get their offers accepted because it's a VA loan, right? We know this is the case. Chaffa loans, VA, FHA, really hard to get these offers accepted. So I was on the phone with a listing agent who said, Kelly, it's a VA buyer. I know we should be supporting our veterans, but we're just worried about the appraisal conditions. And I said, please, I have 24 renovation loans. I can solve for that. Talk to me about the property. What's wrong with the property? So in this particular case, where it's me and Julie at Lowe's, she basically said there's peeling paint, and I think there's a little bit of an issue maybe with some hand railings. I'm like, that's easy. That's easy for us to fix. Please. And then I talked to her a lot about what our solutions would be, so that she had total confidence that I knew what I was talking about. Well, sure enough, the appraisal comes in subject to peeling paint and repair of a handrail. And she was adamant, the seller will not do anything. I said, no problem, I got this. I sent my client, who is a veteran, whose husband is also a veteran and had just been deployed to Ukraine, into Home Depot. I don't mind saying Home Depot because they were terrible to her, to get a paint quote. All I needed, because in this particular program, the borrower can do the work themselves. That's the solution. The borrower, I don't need to go find a contractor. The borrower can, it's painting and a railing. It's two easy repairs. They can do it. So Home Depot would not give her a quote for paint materials. She's all stressed out. Oh, and by the way, she had a baby. They had a young baby who she had brought into Home Depot. I said, I got you. I said, I got you. I went down to Lowe's. I walked in to see Junior, and I said, this was during the pandemic. And I said, Junior, do you want to help me help a veteran buy a house today? This poor kid didn't know what hit him when I walked in the door. He said, oh, yes. I said, I need a painting quote. I need a quote. He said, we don't usually do quotes. I said, here, I said, you and I are going to walk around, and here's the pictures, and you're going to help me put together what I need. And then we're going to call your manager and see how we get a quote. And we did it. We did it. That realtor, that listing agent now sends me all of her business, because she said, you told me it would work. It worked. It was a solution. So we absolutely can make realtors, listing agents feel more comfortable in this process. Appraised values, there's something called an appraisal gap strategy. We had to employ this a lot, especially in early 2021. It's calmed down. It's rare we see a low appraisal today, although I did get one last week. Okay. And as the spring market comes in, I think we're going to see it happen again. So here's how the strategy works. Everybody knows that private mortgage insurance, PMI or MI, is required when you're putting less than 20% down on a house. Millennials hate PMI. I joke around. When did it become a four-letter word? They hate PMI. They feel like the lender is taking extreme financial advantage of them, that they have to have PMI. I've had people say, I'm going to wait till I have 20% down because I don't want to pay the PMI. I'm like, oh gosh, what? We need to have a bigger conversation then. So when you have a house that under appraises, we can use there are different PMI programs we can use to bridge the gap. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark. So this is a true example of a house in Milford, as a matter of fact. The property came in under appraised by 15,000. Okay, now the agents are not happy with each other because the seller doesn't want to pay, the buyer doesn't want to pay. It's 15,000. They don't want to pay $7,500. They don't want to split the difference, yada, yada, yada. We basically use something called single premium mortgage insurance, which cost $1,650 up front to bridge the gap. That both the buyer and seller were willing to split.
Quick question, is that an annual 1,600?
No,
Or
it's
that's
total
one-
cost, single premium, one-time premium.
Oh, wow.
This is somebody who was putting originally 20% down, and because of the lower appraisal, it put them into mortgage insurance, which they were angry about. Then we came up with this solution, and again, kept the deal together, solved the deal. We do this all the time. We pen, it's called an appraisal gap strategy. And it's just, again, a piece of a mortgage program you guys have never had access to or have probably even heard about until these new market conditions took place. So we can solve it.
So what you're saying is, if buyers don't have the liquidity to cover the gap, they can still write an appraisal gap, contingency, as long as you've gone over the single premium mortgage insurance options ahead.
Correct.
Awesome.
Correct. That's cool, right? So I don't know if I'm at the end of my presentation, because I am. All right. Thoughts? What do you want to talk about? We've got 15 minutes. David.
I ask you this all the time. I'm gonna hold you to it at one point, but do you have any sense of value or of how many loans you've written where you've maxed out your client's buying power versus how many times you haven't? Because I think that kind of goes back to our conversations earlier about the crash in the market, where I don't have the number, but my sense of feeling is that the buyers are more educated financially today than they have been in years, where they're not maxing out their loan values. And I don't know, maybe that's not it, or maybe they just have more cash because millennials are living with their parents and they've never moved out and they're going from living in the basement to first-time home buyer.
So so that's always such an intriguing, provocative question. And the reason I think it's hard to quantify is there are a lot of times that we're writing a loan with a maxed out ratio. So are you thinking qualifying from an income standpoint or down payment?
From an income standpoint.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So the problem is, right, is so you've got, let's say, I'm dealing with a couple and the wife has excellent credit, the husband, not so much. I would, if the wife can qualify for the loan on her own with a maxed out ratio,
Gotcha.
I'm gonna put that deal together that way so that their interest rate's better, or so that they can even get the financing if the credit is that bad. Similarly, self-employed borrowers.
But see, in that first case scenario, I would say that then that's a prudent economic choice and that they could have qualified for more, right? Because you only did it off of one partner,
Correct.
right? And so, because that's one of the things that I feel like I've been seeing, and that's where I think some of these equity numbers are a little bit different because buyers are buying with more cash coming to the table. So the equity numbers aren't necessarily built-in equity or equity over time as much as they are that buyers are more economically sound when they're purchasing. Does that?
So I think we'll just push and pull on it, right? I think the other thing that we have to think about is I think we're all exposed to a lot more conventional buyers right now because those are the contracts that are getting approved. When you look at FHA borrowers, VA borrowers, multicultural borrowers, I don't know that I would necessarily agree with that comment. But we're all seeing a lot more conventional because those are the only offers that are getting accepted. I've got tons and tons, so many FHA, VA, and multicultural borrowers who are pre-approved. They're in that pre-approved status. They just can't get a contract accepted.
That's good that you have.
Good loans, great buyers, great borrowers, but we can't get their contracts accepted. We can't get their offers accepted. So I don't know. I don't know if it's perception from, because I have lots of,
No, that was an interesting take on it. It's just that's what the market bears right now, so.
correct.
So. it's not
So our
necessarily-
perception would be like, oh, look, we've got a higher quality buyer coming out, a better educated buyer, but I always worry so much for our multicultural bars, especially Spanish speaking clients where English isn't their first language, because finance is a separate language in and of it to ourselves. And then if it's not, if English isn't your first language, my worry is predatory lending and putting people into things they don't understand. So.
You say multicultural borrowing, that in loans and things like that,
What?
in loans, tax ID loans, is that what you're just thinking about?
I'm just thinking about,
People that don't speak English.
people that don't speak English, other minorities.
Right, tax ID.
Right, right, ITIN, yeah, ITIN loans, so, yeah, those types of situations. But even just straight, like I said, and by the way, I don't want to, please don't make, the assumption here isn't because somebody doesn't speak English, they're automatically an FHA loan, because that's not the case. But yeah, that's where,
I sold a house recently to somebody, I was a listing agent, but the other agent had a client that was Haitian, but he spoke Creole.
yeah,
And it was not easy to find an attorney that could really explain everything to him.
we
And
closed
it
a
all
loan.
worked out good.
I closed a loan 60 days ago for a Haitian Creole speaking client. with
Yeah,
Really significant language barriers. It was.
yeah, they were absolutely fine. They, went through the blind colors, but you just want to make sure everybody understands. what,
Correct.
you know.
You know, Dave, I'm also thinking about your question. I just had a really good thought and it left my head. Hmm?
Take a breath, oxygen helps.
All right, I'm gonna stop thinking about, because that's usually when it'll come back to me. Alan Stewart Jr.
Well, I wanted to see what your opinion or everyone else's opinion is with, again, we've been hearing rates look like they're gonna lower, right? Inventory is super low because we know about the building, no new construction, whatever the reasons are. Now, when interest rates drop down, that opens the buyer pool up a little more, right? And so in theory, you would think that it would close the inventory or squish the inventory even more. However, this is where it gets into more of an art than a science. I know a lot of people that want to list with me, but they don't want to list and buy at 6.5% because they're at like, let's say 3.5%. Now I've had a discussion with them and they'd say, if I'm in the high fives or like somewhere around mid to high fives, I'd probably.
That's, by the way, we've seen that that's the emotional threshold.
Okay, so I just wanted to get because really the way that, like my personal business, like I don't sell as much anymore, but I have access to all the stats of my realtors, right? So, and it's a big enough portion of data where I can kind of look at it and make a prediction of where I think the market's gonna trend to, and so I just want to see if everybody else kind of has that thought process as well, because these are the conversations that I'm having, right? And I don't want to just assume that this is the direction it's gonna go based on like my limited portion of data.
Yeah, no,
right?
we,
And also, one last thing is, I was not in this market, I was not in this industry in the last recession. So when interest rates dropped after that, did we see inventory increase?
We had saturated, there was so much inventory after the last.
Well, there was a squish of inventory, because I remember when I first became licensed. My broker of record, we hired a broker of record, I paid her just to park her license with us until I got my broker's license, right? And I remember she did like give me a little bit of advice. It wasn't that much, but then one thing she said, when you get to a listing market, a seller's market, you're gonna regret it. You're not gonna like it because you'll be writing contracts on the trunk of your car. Meaning like you're gonna write, right?
well, that is how it was done back then.
Exactly, and now in theory, it's the same thing, it's just done digitally. But she was telling me inventory was super smashed, but then after that, we saw an influx of it. But then again, we saw an influx because of probably, this is where there's so many different points of data, foreclosures, right? Right now, not a lot of foreclosures, right? And they're only trickling into the market, because you probably agree with this, they're renovating their foreclosures Correct. They're not, because their portfolios are not that vast.
Not even that.
Point,
They're not having foreclosures right now because of COVID. So COVID, we literally had a year and a half stall of foreclosures.
yep,
So,
but the ones that we have are being renovated.
to some point, banks will start to get through because they did this before. And banks started hiring realtors and paying them less and less because, hey, there's 100 of you, so I'll list it with you if you do it for whatever less than the other guy was doing. Then they ask you to start managing their renovations for them. Oh, and by the way, we'll pay you within 60 or 90 days.
And then they don't, yeah.
Nobody's doing that. And so the availability of contractors right now, because I used to work with groups that did a lot of that work where they would do those, and we'd see some of these bank renovations and they were garbage because the contractor doing the work wasn't being held accountable by the realtor because the realtor's only financial interest was to get the house sold, not the quality of the renovation. And once you have that gap and that gap happens, which it will, you'll start to see the bank stop doing that again. Because you don't have a vested interest in the bank's money, you only have a vested interest in keeping their business as a listing. And the contractor's gonna send you a picture of the kitchen floor, and you're gonna forward that picture to the bank, and the bank's gonna write the check, and you have no idea what house that picture was taken in, right? And so that's part of it. I think the foreclosure part, I had a friend of mine who is a hedge fund manager in New York City. And he buys defaulted loans and defaulted debt, turns them around, pieces off assets, that whole, whatever. And we were talking, and I asked him about what his thought was on foreclosures. And he doesn't believe foreclosures are gonna happen because there's too much equity. But I think what people forget is, you can't write a loan to someone who doesn't have any income coming in to start in the first place. So the fact that we have equity is not going to stop foreclosures from happening or forcing people to sell. Now, they might not be REOs, but it's still gonna force people to sell because Kelly can't write them a loan that doesn't have any income. Now, there are some programs, reverse mortgages, things like that. But then if someone hasn't paid their loan in 6 months, what's their credit looking like? So you have to understand that not everybody, just because you have equity.
That's true. Yeah, I agree.
Foreclosure, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that you're gonna start to see happening more and more. And as the courts catch up and as everything starts to happen, because they're still doing, one of the problems you're seeing now is the guy had a 2% loan. And now the bank is redoing his loan as a reno, but they're not doing it at the 2.5% that his initial loan was, they're doing it at 5%.
Yeah.
And they're rewriting a loan that's actually gonna cost them more money on a monthly basis now than it did 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, so, and thank you for all that. So the RBO is only a portion. I'm just wondering, traditionally, do we see when interest rates drop after a spike? Do we see that loosen up in, like, more people come to the market because they've been holding? Or is anybody else seeing that? The discussion that they're having with their data?
You're gonna see more buyers.
Well, I know that's obvious. That's obvious. I'm
Right,
talking about
but
second
you're
tier
talking about how does that correlate
to the
or
listings.
cause?
Because we can see more buyers,
Inventory.
but if inventory doesn't
We
come.
don't have you-
Yeah.
I have a handful of people that want to sell, but they're like, I'm not gonna sell it.
In my-
They might.
I'm the same way. I
That's what
know
I'm trying.
a tremendous amount of people that want to sell. They don't know where they're going, the uncertainty of the market fluctuation, and they're just sitting tight.
But
So
that was-
I'm in your situation too.
Well, I have people that they know where they're going, they're concerned about that, but they're just like, I just don't wanna pay, unless it comes down to 5.5. Like, they're like saying that
But
number.
then when the price goes back up, I'm not paying that much for that house, that's crazy, right? And so that's the problem now is there's so much information out there and everybody thinks they're a guru because they read some article or they saw some news flash on Yahoo TV or something or whatever, or YouTube.
TikTok, buddy, that's not.
I'm dating myself here. But I mean, that's part of the problem. A lot of what we're talking to is people now is just the mental approach of what we need to do. What I always tell people is like in those situations, you sit down with them and say, okay, you have a house, why are you moving in the first place?
Yeah, the why.
And that's what people forget. Like, I didn't buy my truck because it was cheaper than another truck. No, because I wouldn't have bought that truck, right? I bought the truck because I liked it, it fit my needs. So why do you want to sell? Are you downsizing? Are you upsizing? Are you leaving the state? Are you retiring? Let's look at that cost, right? Let's look at the cost of you staying where you are versus you making this move and forget the interest rate, right? Like, forget the interest rate. Are you a day trader? We're trading interest rates now. Why do you want to move? So if you're in a huge house and you're taxed for $20,000 a year, if you want to downsize to, and your tax is going to be $5,000 a year, there's your 1% interest right there. How long do you want to wait, right? And those are the conversations that I have with people when I talk to them about, it, It's, yeah, that 5%, but then you could always refinance if it gets there. What if the rates were to 7 or 9? Now your house is worthless. Now you have less buying power, you have less equity.
And I agree, and I appreciate that, because I had the same conversation with people. However, I can't have the conversation with every potential seller in the state of Connecticut. So a lot of the inventory is contingent upon the conversation that the other realtors are having. So that's why I'm asking traditionally or historically,
That's
what
a
does it
phenomenal,
look like?
phenomenal question, and I don't know the answer.
Yeah,
Here's
But I'm gonna
one.
find out.
But
yeah.
after the last bubble, did you find that you had inventory?
Well, you just had,
The last one?
no, please, it was,
Houses sat for years.
it's, yeah, you can't even.
But the good one that I'm thinking when you're saying it is, you sell high, you buy high. You sell low, you buy low. My question, if you don't mind, is, it's a conundrum for me. I don't understand, like, there are so many rentals going up and so many young professionals that are paying, $3,000 and $4,000 a month. And I just don't understand how they can afford to do that and save to buy a home.
Correct.
Have you noticed that in Connecticut?
It is a
I don't-
big issue. It's a huge
I
issue.
mean, I just don't understand.
When I researched what the average rent in Connecticut was, and it came in at 1,700, I'm like, ooh.
And dumps for 1,700. When I
You know, it's really more, we know it's more than that. That's the data, so I'm not
Yeah,
gonna.
No, I know, that's true, because
But
it's
you
like
know,
people who've been in the same rent for years.
And I'll say to people, I'll say to renters, especially, I'm like, you're paying, they're like, well, I don't look where the interest rates are. I'm like, well, you're paying 100% interest.
You're paying that. That's a good.
No, you're,
It
no,
is,
no,
it's
it's,
100%.
so you don't like 6.5%, but you're paying 100%. And then, no, it's not really interest. You go, no, that's exactly what interest is. You're borrowing someone's property. There's a cost to borrow that property, and you're paying 100% interest.
When was the boom before 2005? Because in 2004, 2005, the rate dipped into the low fives, right?
Correct.
Low fives, and that was historically low.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right? And so now the rates, my first loan that I got was an investment property, I was like 7.25%. I still have that loan today because nobody wants to finance me, but I'm 20 years into the 25-year note. So there's really no reason for me to.
No
I'm
reason.
saving pennies. But that loan's at like 7.25, and I don't care. But 5.25, 5.5 was historic. I was stupid back then for that loan. Now the loans are 2.5%. That's never gonna exist ever again.
They were fake. I keep saying, like,
The boom before that, I don't know if you remember. what-
yeah, I do.
Early to mid 90s? Is that what you would say?
Yeah.
So before, when the boom came, like 2000, you're asking me about 2000 to 2005?
Was it 90, 97 or 90,
Yeah.
96?
You're talking about interest rates were anywhere from high 7s to mid 8s.
Right.
And then even during the boom of the early aughts, they were still, in the high 6s, because when rates started tumbling down to 5.5%, we had people doing multiple refis. Because like first they reset down into the, let's say, they dropped the 0.5%, everybody refinanced, then they dropped again, everybody refinanced again. I will tell you this, from my conversations, millennials don't care what the historical interest rate trend is.
No.
They're pissed off that they didn't get that 2.75, 3.25% interest rate. They're pissed off about it. I mean, just, telling them that somebody had a 14% interest rate, or it means nothing to them.
Right.
You sell to a baby boomer right now, they're not blinking twice over interest rates. I mean, all the baby boomers that I'm doing lones for,
I think it's just gonna take time for them.
and I think
to not
we're seeing that.
understand
We are
Because
seeing
we're
that
already
they,
seeing them adjust.
we are seeing a psychological adjustment to
That's-
the higher
That's
rates.
ultimately what this whole thing is around, mindset.
Correct.
There's obviously a big change. 3 months ago, you're hearing the rate. Well,
And now
And
it's
now,
possible.
that's not even coming up in the conversation, but at least with mine.
I agree.
They're fully aware of, as I saw, the rates went from almost 8 to now last week
Yeah.
was 6, now 6.5. They see the change, they're understanding that the inflation, is
Yeah.
directly correlated. with it.
We're,
So
so
it's just the price points.
when I'm out visiting all my offices throughout the Northeast, that's one of the things I'm constantly polling for, and everybody's saying the same thing. It's less. There's, people have gotten their heads around the fact that this is the return.
Right.
So, good.
Well, hopefully you got a couple of tips that you can use.
Thank you.
This is great.
And I will get an email out to you this afternoon.
How are
with-
you guys on Zoom? Did you guys like that? I don't have the date, but next month, the next ramp program,
It's the 15th.
it's on
March
the 15th. So we're gonna be doing social media. I'm actually not gonna do that alone. I'm gonna pull in some realtors from big brokerages, small brokerages. That are very successful on social media. And we're gonna be talking about like mindset around it, the approach around it, what's working, what's not working around it. You know, these are how much of their business is actually coming from this, right? Because there's that old adage, is it marketing or is it prospecting, right? And so, we'll be talking about that next month. So I hope to see
Yeah,
you all
for sure.
there on the
Thank
15th,
you.
all right?
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Kelly.